Namaste and greetings. I, Shweta, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, New Delhi. Extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today we are gathered here for day 8 of UPLGYF, Urban Policy and Local Governance Youth Fellowship, an online national autumn and winter school program, a 4-month online immersive introductory leadership certificate training fellowship program organized by IMPRI, Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, IMPRI, New Delhi. The chair for the program is Professor Manjula Bharathy ji, professor at the Center for Urban Policy and Governance, School of Habitat Studies, and a professor at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences and a visiting professor at IMPRI. The conveners for this course are Dr. Soumya Chattopadhyay, Mr. Tikender Singh Panwar, Mr. Sameer Unhale, Mr. Arvind Unni, Dr. Simi Mehta, and Dr. Arjun Kumar. We have shared the course outline and reading resources document in your email for your kind attention. We will be providing videos of each session for flexible learning at your place and convenient time. Before we start today's session, I would like to announce the housekeeping rules. It is encouraged that you join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the questions to save time. So without any further delay, today I would like to hand over to the chair, Professor Manjula Bharathy ji, for her remarks, opening remarks. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So thank you once again for a very interesting session of Urban Policy, Local Governance Youth Fellowship. So today you will be having this section by Dr. Ratoola Kundu, who is working as a professor, assistant professor in the Center for Urban Policy and Governance in the School of Habitat Studies, Tata Institute. And her areas of experience and expertise is on transport, urban mobility. And I'm sure that this session will be very important for you in understanding the context of mobility in the and understanding and how it dialogues with the urban spaces. So till so far, we have actually covered sessions on understanding what is urban local governance, imagining urban local governance, how the whole question of marginality and vulnerabilities are produced in the context of urban spaces, and how it is important to look at this question of a systemic vulnerability that has been there in the urban spaces, and the services that has been provided, especially with respect to the water governance, and how it is important to understand it again with the question of marginality and vulnerability. And you have also studied about the district planning and the importance of looking at that from a planning context. And the last class, we also had climate and gender and how it is important, and also housing, So as a sectoral interventions and how it is important to look that from the context, again, the very important question of, social housing, co-housing, all this important, public housing were also been discussed. So today, another important aspect of urban local governance is the mobility dimension will be discussed, and whether you will be saying about how it is important to look that the urban local governance and mobility are connected with each other, dialogue with each other. When we're looking at the urban spaces, how the mobility forms, informs and deforms the urban spaces, and how it is important to look at that when we're saying about the last mile connectivity, when you're looking at the violences that is happening in the urban spaces, what is the role of it? We are looking at the employment options, what is the importance of mobility? We are looking at the gendered spaces, what is the importance of? We are looking at the marginal spaces, what is the importance of mobility there, and how mobility is forming, informing, deforming, these kinds of dimensions that we are speaking about. So I would like to welcome Dr. Ratoola Kundu to take the session. Welcome, Dr. Ratoola. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manjula, and a warm greeting to everyone out there. So my background is actually in urban sociology and urban planning, and I have an interest in really looking at different social groups in the city, particularly marginalized groups, groups of urban poor, the houseless, street vendors, etc., who are often sort of invisibilized in the dominant frameworks of urban planning. And while doing this, I also teach about urban mobility, particularly how people move around in cities, who is moving around and for what purpose are we moving around, and how are we actually moving around in cities, right? So really looking at what kind of sort of frameworks, what kind of infrastructures, what kind of, say, regulations, and even social norms guide our movement patterns, our everyday movement patterns, right? And what are the kinds of available sort of infrastructures, modes that are there that again shape our access to various things in the city, right? So we move around for particular reasons. We don't move around without actually a reason. There's very, loitering is not something that we do generally, though it's an important function in our daily lives as well, I think. But movement is always with a particular purpose, right? So if we have to go to school, if we have to reach our place of work, if we have to sort of, access the doctor, everything means that we have to move from our place of residence, our homes, to wherever that we want to move to. So in that sense, transportation and movement is really a function of these other different needs in society, right? The need to be connected to jobs, the need to be connected to, to hospitals, the need to be connected to open spaces. For all of this, we require different kinds of modes of urban transportation, right, in our cities. By modes, I mean it could be buses, it could be trains, it could be your own two-wheeler, it could be your cycle, it could be, our own two legs, which is walking, which is actually the most important as well as the most perhaps neglected dimension of urban mobility in our cities, So and today's session is really about understanding um, how are decisions really made with respect to how to plan these services, transportation services? Do we need more roads? Where should we build more roads? Do we need more buses? Do we need more trains? At what time should we increase more services, say for metros? Should we build the coastal road or not? Suppose in Mumbai, that's been, quite a matter of public debate. So who's actually making these decisions? What guides these decisions? What are the kind of parameters behind these kind of decision-making frameworks, right? So should we use, our funds and our finances to build, say, new road networks, say a flyover, or should we devote that money to, say, making our pavements better, right? Or our sidewalks better? How do we prioritize, these kind of decisions? Do we sort of spend money more on maintenance of what is actually already there? Say, better kind of metal roads, better maintenance of, say, potholes, getting rid of potholes from the road and maintenance of roads so that, we have a smoother ride? Or should we move this important money to making new roads? So how do we decide this? And who's actually deciding this in our cities, right? What are the institutions? What are the organizations? What are the agencies that are involved in this decision-making process? And because you're all sort of learning about the importance of urban local governance, how does the urban local body feature in these decision-making processes? Particularly also, what is our stake as citizens of cities in these larger decisions around infrastructure, around roads, around transport services, etc. Okay, so I'm going to be taking you through some of these issues, and let's see how much we can cover in this brief thing. So I'm going to share my PPT. Is this visible?
Yes, that is visible.
Okay. So who's really in charge of planning, who's in charge of operating, and as well as managing urban transportation infrastructure and services, right? So urban transport is actually quite like a complex system, right? So you have the modes, like I talked about. You have the buses, the trains, then you have even boats in some cities. So these are the various modes of transportation. You have cars, you have cycles, you have, two-wheelers. All of these are modes of transportation. Okay. Next, you have the kind of infrastructure. Okay, not the modes, the infrastructure that is required, meaning on what so you need train tracks for trains. Okay, you need tracks for metros. You need roads for your buses and cars and your cycles and your two-wheelers, right? So that's basically the infrastructure. You also need infrastructure like bus stops, metro stations. So you need actually access to land to develop these kind of infrastructures, right? So other than that, what do we need? We also need a set of regulations, right? So how do we license our vehicles, right? How do we get a commercial license? How do we get a non-commercial license, right? Who can get a driving license? And on what basis is the driving license given? If an auto wala wants a license to operate an auto, what kind of regulatory functions are there? And now, of course, there's a whole lot of new issues that we can see with the introduction of electric vehicles, and as well as, these vehicles that ply on digital platforms, your Ola, your Uber, etc. So what kinds of regulations, what kind of safety regulations, what kind of, vehicular regulations are going to be in place in order to sort of manage all this and ensure that there is safety on the roads, that nobody overcharges, that there is no monopoly of a particular kind of transportation mode, etc. Right? So all of these things need to come together. So therefore, urban transportation is quite a complex system. Now, why is urban transportation vital to our cities, right? So, cities are kind of called the engines of economic growth, right? This is where a lot of the GDP production is happening. So, but in order to see that our cities remain, vibrant, our cities are able to, produce goods and services, we need transportation. Because transportation is that link that is connecting people to jobs, right? It allows not just for the movement of people on an everyday basis, but you'll see transportation is also allowing for the movement of goods, right? So the goods that we need are everyday things like, right from potatoes, which we don't grow in our cities, but grow elsewhere, that needs to come from the, the mandis, the sabzi mandi into the city. It's transportation that brings it from the mandi in the periphery of the city to our doorstep, right? To the market and then to our doorstep, right? So transportation is vital, just not for the movement of people, but it is also movement of goods, right? It is connecting us, people, to very important social amenities and services. Okay. So for instance, it is in connecting us to educational facilities, to health facilities, even to leisure facilities, right? Say the cinema hall. Okay. So because not all of these different things are in different places in the city, right? In our house, we only live. right? That's how urban planning has kind of separated these kind of different functions. The housing is for inhabitation, right? And then there is a separate place for work, there's a separate place for education, there's a separate place for health. And in order to access all of these, we need to have transportation. We need to have roads and paths and sidewalks. We need to have cars or cycles or metros to actually be able to access these different places. Moreover, it's very, very important for our social interaction, which is a very, very vital need for us, right? How do we meet people? How will we sort of, keep society going through interactions? And therefore, transportation is actually ensuring that people connect with people, right? Transportation, and nowadays there is a lot of issues that are coming to our knowledge and is being highlighted is about, the linkage between transportation and, say, public health. The pandemic, for instance, revealed to us, when we were sitting inside our homes and expected to work also in our homes, we realized that, even if for those who were sort of essential workers, they had to actually go out into the city in order to be able to work, the essential workers. And they needed access to public transport that was safe, that was affordable, etc. So how would actually public transport be devised in a way that, COVID wouldn't be affecting everyone? So, because usually our public transport is excessively overcrowded, right? So I don't know, this is a fact, but, in the train networks of Mumbai, for instance, every day, the Mumbai sort of railways, they carry almost 6 to 7 million people in a day, right? So imagine, and it's called a super crush load inside the train, especially during peak hours, where basically, it's almost like, you're packed like sardines in that coach. You don't even have the opportunity to, sort of move out at your station. You'll just be, moving with the crowd. The crowd pulls you in and the crowd pushes you out almost. It's so crowded. And of course, this leads to sort of unsafety because as far as the estimates go, almost 10 people die every day on the Mumbai railway networks because of this overcrowding factor, right? So while transportation is so important for healthy cities, for maintaining public health, etc., so it's also sort of important to understand how does transport improve sustainability of cities, right? How do we ensure that, our cities don't grow and expand to such a limit that, we take almost 1 hour, 1.5 hours to commute to our place of work almost every day, one way, right? And that means that adds to our demands for fuel. That means it makes really sort of demands on our environment, etc. So how can we use transportation in a strategic manner to also achieve sustainable cities? And the approach to this, what people have talked about, many experts are talking about now, is a simple ASI approach, which is avoid, shift, improve. Avoid meaning avoid private transportation, shift to public transportation, and also improve public transportation. And these have to go hand in hand together because only one approach will not actually solve our issues on the ground. Okay. Now, transportation can also ensure some mode of gender inclusion, right? For instance, it's important to see how transportation can open up opportunities for women to access work, women to access colleges, in women to access education and schools. Okay. So for areas in the city where there is, a lack of good connectivity, or a lack of affordable transportation or safe transportation, you often see women, giving up studies or women giving up jobs because, there is no access to they cannot access another place in the city in order to go for a job or in order to go to the school, etc., because there is no connectivity. And this is actually quite common. So proper public transportation and proper urban public transportation would actually ensure that, it can even bring along some kind of gender inclusion in cities. Some of you may be aware, but there was a move in, I think, Tamil Nadu, where they made public transportation free for women. And it immediately saw a rise in the number of people, actually, the number of women accessing public transport. So clearly, there are certain barriers to also accessing public transport, but once available, people make good use of it, particularly women want to make good use of it, and it opens up their world to many, many more greater opportunities that gives them a better quality of life, right? So transport plays this very important social dimension as well, right? And of course, transport can also address questions of urban poverty. As you know, our cities are sometimes quite segregated, We are developing in a manner where more and more poor people are getting pushed to the peripheries of the city, where, these kind of rehabilitation, resettlement housing is coming up, these blocks, tower blocks of apartments. Now, but the jobs essentially that urban poor do are in the heart of the city. So if they're going to be pushed to a greater distance away from the center of the city, and if there is no connection between that place and the center of the city, then many people will become poorer and they will become much more vulnerable. In Latin America, this was being addressed in pretty innovative ways, where, you have the favelas on the hilltops, which are very segregated from the rest of the city, which is down in the valley. And what this city has done is to provide like a cable car that goes from the city center up to the favela, right? It's a pretty sort of cost-effective public transport measure. And what this has done is that it has opened up the work opportunity for people living in the favelas, right? So these favelas in the Latin American cities were also extremely violence-prone areas because people didn't have jobs and they took to crime in order to make, money on the side, etc. And, women were afraid to move out on the street for either education or work. But the bringing in of this cable car opened up work opportunities, and more people from the favelas began to access the city center for jobs, etc. And that had a big role in actually reducing not just urban poverty, but also levels of violence in the favelas. So now you can see why urban transport is vital to cities and city making. Okay. But there are quite a few issues with urban transport, right? So there is increasing levels of congestion, and that means you're stuck in traffic, and that is loss of productivity, increasing numbers of traffic-related accidents, unsafety, vehicular pollution. And of course, it is because that, our cities are also not walkable. These are not cities that are meant for children. There is so many accidents happening. The focus seems to be on how to move traffic more speedily rather than, ensure the safety of everyone on the roads, right? And of course, one big reason behind this is, of course, the increasing level of dependence on private modes of transportation in our cities, and the decreasing quality of public transport in our cities, right? So how do we reverse that situation, right? How do we address these kind of complex, really, really entangled sort of issues, right? Our cities are growing beyond limits, and that means, you spend more energy, you consume more fuel in making those trips, etc. Right? And that is bad for our sustainability overall, right? How can we ensure, not just, affordable, but how can we ensure safe modes of transportation in cities, inclusive modes of public transportation in cities, sustainable and resilient modes of transportation in cities, right? So one of the mayors of, again, one of the Latin American cities where a lot of these experiments have taken place in urban transportation and improving urban mobility, one of the mayors called Jamie Lerner, he said that, a country's measure of development is not by how many people are moving around, in how many people have cars, right? But it is measured by how many rich people are willingly taking the bus, right? As a matter of pride, as a matter of everyday movability, right? So, and that should be our measure of development. That should be our measure of success, that we are paying that much attention and investment to improve our public transport in such a manner that even the rich use public transport, that they don't rely on private transport to move around the city. So how do we solve this complex issue, right? Do we need more roads? Do we need more wider roads? Do we need more flyovers? But if you build a flyover, you know that the congestion just moves to another point. It doesn't really solve the issue of congestion. Do we supply more buses? Do we supply more trains? Where are we going to get the money from? Should we introduce better technology, cleaner technologies, greener technologies? But how do we do that? How do we ensure, better traffic engineering, perhaps road design? Maybe our roads are not designed well. What kind of materials are we using for our pavements? Why is there such a runoff? If our roads are more concrete, is that leading to urban heat island effects? So these are all intersectional kind of issues, right? So, and how do we sort of bring all of this together in a framework? Who is actually going to think through all these multiple dimensions, right? And how do we integrate these complex issues? So urban transport is not just about buses. It's not just about roads. It's just not about the regulations, so the Motor Vehicles Act, for instance, that's a regulation. So it's not just about these, which is specific to the transport sector, but the transport sector is actually linked to many other urban subsystems, particularly land use planning and land use design, environmental regulations and standards, energy efficiency, social dynamics, especially thinking about issues around equity, vulnerability and welfare dimensions, as well as regulatory systems. So how do we link urban transport to all these different subsystems? And what is the mechanism for doing that? Okay, so complex integration has to be reached across 4 dimensions, okay? There has to be spatial integration. So as you know, our cities are growing, they're expanding. So cities can, spill over to also, and where we live can also spill over to peri-urban areas, satellite townships, etc. So imagine moving through these multiple jurisdictions, right? So you may be living in a nearby sort of smaller town, but you have to get to the bigger city in order to access work or access your college. If that is the case, you need something that's spatially integrated, a bus network that covers these multiple jurisdictions of small town and the big city as well. Because you cannot get onto a bus then that stops at the border of your small town and then get onto another bus that then will take you to the city. You lose time that way, right? So how do you achieve spatial integration? How do you then achieve number 2, functional integration, right? Because like I said, transport is about bringing together multiple subsystems, right? So how do you ensure that your land use plans, right, or your development plans and your master plans are able to address the question of, say, transportation? What kind of roads, where are these growth areas happening? How will the transportation plan be integrated with the master plan, right? How will economic development be integrated with, say, transportation plans? Where are the new economic centers or hubs coming up? Are they linked to back to where people are living? Where are satellite towns coming up? And are they linked back to where people are working, for instance? So all of these need functional integration. Okay. We also need sectoral integration. That's the third point. Okay. Because often one single daily trip that we make from our home to our workplace may involve multiple modes of transportation, right? So if I'm imagining myself to be in a place like Calcutta where I work, but I live in a place called Howrah, which is across the river. So first of all, I have to come out of my house in Howrah, walk a bit up to maybe the riverfront, where I will get onto a steamer, a boat on the jetty. That will take me to the other side, the Calcutta side. Once I disembark on the Calcutta side, then I will have to get onto a bus, right? And that bus will then take me to where I work. Now, so I'm walking, I'm taking the boat, and I'm also taking the bus, right? Maybe in between also I need to take an auto somewhere. So that means there are multiple modes involved, and this requires sectoral integration. Can we make it seamless? Can we have, for instance, Hong Kong does this, where it has an integrated and an intelligent transportation system where fare cards, right? There's just one fare card across all different modes of transportation, including water-based transportation, surface-based transportation, and underground transportation, right? So how do we bring these different agencies, these different modes of transportations together? How do we ensure there's just one ticket that we can use across these different multiple modes of transportation? And then we are talking about hierarchical integration. Okay, that's the fourth point. We need both vertical coordination across different agencies, which is like the central level government, the national central level agencies, state level agencies, and local level agencies, right? And then we need horizontal coordination in a city, because there are there are multiple agencies within the city also that are working. For instance, in the city, you have a development authority, you might have a smart city sort of special purpose vehicle, and then you have the municipal organization, the municipality, the municipal corporation, which is also in charge of various things. So how do you ensure that they're all talking to one another, that they are collaborating not just on data, but they're also collaborating with respect to information, knowledge? The institutions are coming together in order to plan and operate these different systems. Unless you have this coordination, actually, people suffer. So for instance, the metro system is run by the central agency. It's an autonomous kind of agency. And then you have the bus system, which is probably operated by the state government, right? And the roads and the road paving, the road maintenance, etc., is done by the local government. Okay. Now, you can't build a metro, and parallelly, you can't have also a bus system on that same route. Then they are competing with one another for fares, right? And that means that people ultimately suffer, right? It could not just be the commuters who suffer. Often it could be introduction of competing systems means also it may mean loss of livelihoods. So for instance, there might be, a private sort of informal systems of delivery, say, you have these small kind of tuk-tuks or these kind of smaller buses, RVs, which are running in, say, smaller towns, tier 2 cities, carrying passengers, and suddenly you decide to implement a bus system in the city, right? On the same route. Now, what will happen is the formal bus system will now compete with the informal system that's already there. Okay. Maybe the formal system is more affordable. Maybe the formal system ensures more safety and better kind of transparency, etc. But it's still competing with those other kind of informal modes of transport. And that means their livelihood might be threatened, right? And often you'll find, therefore, when there is competition on the road like this, these kind of vehicles, they often compete on the road for passengers, which leads to an unsafe condition, and often accidents happen in this kind of a situation. So how do we ensure these are coordinated? How do we ensure these are regulated? And all of this. So this is quite complex in the kinds of different integrations that must be achieved. But the question is, who is actually responsible, right? Urban transport is often called as an institutional orphan because, as per the 7th schedule of the Constitution, urban transport is really a function of the state under the Urban Development Department. But Urban Development Department does land use planning, it does so many other functions, and often transportation is not really its main goal unless, there is a major highway to be planned, or an expressway to be planned, or coastal road to be planned, a major bus adda to be planned, etc. Right? There are often, even in a particular city, if you take the case of any city that you're living in, you'll find that there are multiple departments, multiple ministries, multiple scales of government, often overlapping jurisdictions in when it comes to urban transportation. So a simple thing as, if you were to walk down your street and if you were to sort of figure out, the pavement is really in very bad shape, who do I really go to in order to address this question, right? Why is my pavement so bad, right? Do I go to my local councillor? Okay. Do I go to the corporator? Do I go to the MLA? Who do I actually issue this to? Or do I have to go to the ward office of the municipal corporation and talk to the assistant engineer? Where am I supposed to really address this question, right? And who is actually looking after this, right? Who has the mandate to actually look after this? So almost every mode of transport has its own ministry at the national level. But there's no single act or ministry that looks at the urban sector comprehensively. Like I said, you could be moving from walking to a boat to a bus to an auto in order to complete one trip in one day, right? From your home to your workplace. So how many ministries are going to be involved in actually the governance of, say, water transport? Is that going to be a different ministry from, say, surface transport? Usually these are different, right? And there are different people in charge, and these different departments don't talk to one another, don't coordinate with one another, and often act in silo, right? And that's one of the major issues in urban transportation planning and management. So urban transport governance is very fragmented, it's really muddled, and it's full of gaps. Like there are tremendous amount of gaps which are not being addressed because there is no single lead authority in kind of taking care of this, So for instance, non-motorized transportation, so walking and cycling, right? Who will take care of actually ensuring that there are cycle tracks, that sidewalks and pavements are measured? Who will actually do the equitable distribution of road space so that, we can move more buses and more people in more public transport rather than giving space to private transport, right? How do we integrate land use with transportation planning? Many of you might have heard of, compact cities. How do we ensure that cities are compact? How do we ensure that, what kind of transportation modes will actually fulfill some of these goals of integrating these cities? Say, for instance, the 15-minute city idea. How do we actually reach that, right? Unless you address issues of urban planning, you will not be able to address issues of urban transport, right? So how do we also, get different modes of transportation to talk to one another? Can different modes of transportation share, manpower, resources, even space, for instance? This is a chart that kind of lays out the kind of current context, and it says really how, the city and metropolitan governments, the local government has very little role to play actually with respect to urban transport. Mostly it is to do with road construction development, sometimes route planning for buses, and some bit of land acquisition to ensure that, you can build a bus stop, etc. But it is the state government that takes up the sort of meaty role. And a lot of this is the state operates, sort of regulates, for instance, the tariff, the revenue generation, it operates buses, etc., etc. Right? The city government also, of course, is in charge of city planning, master planning, making city mobility plans, also ensuring non-motorized transport infrastructure planning. But it is the state that does the heavy lifting in terms of regulation, in terms of operating the different modes of transport, especially public transportation, which is buses. And then, of course, you have at the level of the national government that you have certain sort of key sort of policy frameworks and guidelines, regulatory frameworks that are there, the Motor Vehicles Act that then applies, right? So in that sense, a lot of the work is actually being done by the state, very little is being done by the city, and there are major gaps between the state and the city level. So for instance, who should come up with a city level transport policy? Right? If you want to create more walking infrastructure, if you want to create transportation in your cities that addresses the concerns of women particularly, who should be making these policies, who should be drawing up the policies? If you want to make walkable sort of infrastructure, if you want to sort of say, I want to create a bus rapid transit system in my city because this is what people need. They don't need expensive metros, but they actually need affordable buses. So let's make a bus rapid transit system, but that means you have to take away part of the road in order to create dedicated lanes for the buses to run. Now, these kind of decisions, are they going to happen at the city level? If so, is there kind of a mechanism to do this? Is there a regulatory body to do this? The answer is no. So a lot of the institutional gaps that have been mentioned are, there is no sort of connection between land use planning and transportation planning. There is no multimodal infrastructure planning. There is no connection between informal modes of transport and formal modes of transport, or regularizing informal modes of transport. So you find chaos on our roads, right? Really a lot of chaos and a lot of issues. So for instance, Delhi right now, the kind of air quality that it is facing, it has been recently found out that almost, 2/3 of that is because of vehicular pollution. It is not due to stubble burning, but mostly coming from vehicular pollution. So how do we integrate this idea of vehicular pollution to air quality management? How do we ensure that there is one authority that looks into all of these different things? The National Urban Transport Policy of 2006 actually said that we should come up with a unified metropolitan transport authority in all cities with population over 1 million. So they were supposed to be the nodal agencies. They were supposed to be coming from different agencies. They would be in charge of making the comprehensive mobility plan. They would be coordinating these kind of different modes of transport, but very few urban unified metropolitan transport authorities have actually been formed. And this is because there has been no funds which have been separately delegated to them. There is often a lack of technical capacity. So, we don't know how to actually do this, envision such kind of a system where, there's one nodal agency taking charge of various different kinds of modes of transport. And of course, there is lack of legal backing for these kind of these structures, these kind of organizations, which are supposed to bring together these different kind of agencies and make decision-making much more seamless. Okay. There is, however, some experimentation that's going on, and I will try and end with this because I know we're going over the time limit. So for instance, in Karnataka, you have the Department of Urban and Land Transportation. So as the name suggests, it brings in land as well as transportation together, right? Which is key to actually how urban transportation planning has to be done, because you need to understand how cities are growing, where are the growth nodes, where do we develop transport infrastructure, where do we put in more connectivity, how do we sort of connect, marginalized sort of or socially vulnerable spaces to the heart of the city, etc. So the DULT is kind of a nodal agency, and it is supposed to promote sustainable transportation across the state of Karnataka, right? So and in order to do this, they've set apart a separate kind of fund, which is the State Urban Transportation Fund. And also it has formed a Karnataka Non-Motorized Transportation Agency in order to enhance the non-motorized transport, which is walking and cycling in cities. And that's quite unique because that's the least priority in terms of how we plan our cities, because our plans seem to cater to cars and not to moving people around, So it was also a research and innovation center in order to build in research into how it brings together or integrates land use planning along with transportation planning. However, this particular organization came into effect because of an executive order by the state government. It is not backed by a sort of a legal backing, and therefore it has, there is no sort of clarity in terms of, whether its decisions will be full and final, and how will, say, other agencies take on board these kind of orders and these kind of decisions, right? So in effect, whereas it did come in to sort of coordinate things better, it has also led to a lot of issues around power dimensions and hierarchies, as different kind of bodies and authorities are still sort of fighting out and saying, claiming that we know better, and the DULT has no powers over our operations and our revenue collection, etc., right? So this is with respect to our country, but the one that I would expect you to sort of read, if you're interested in this, is to really look at the Transport for London, which came through the Greater London Authority Act, which is an organization that controls not just the London Underground, but it also brings together the underground and surface transportation, including water transportation, bus transportation, including regulating low emission zones, planning for cycle tracks, planning for walkability measures, putting in congestion pricing, all of these mechanisms. And it is an organization that is headed by the Mayor of London. So it is an elected mayor, and he has to present the plan along with the master plan for the city to the parliament. So, it is an elected member who is therefore politically involved in taking this stake and ensuring that the people's desires, people's needs are reflected in the way transportation functions as a comprehensive kind of managed issue in the city of London. So with that, I'm going to sort of stop my discussion. I welcome questions at this point.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That was a very wonderful session. You delved into the important components of urban transport, wherein you also highlighted the challenges and issues faced in the sort of current landscape. I think it also enhanced our understanding in the complexities involved in creating effective and sustainable transportation systems. Thank you very much for the session, ma'am. I now invite the chair for her remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Kundu, for a very interesting class in such a short span of time, where she had actually started the class with the question of connectivity and how it is important to bring the thematic vertical of connectivity to discuss that with the transport. And there she started speaking about the whole question of, mobility, mobility, connectivity, and urban local governance, and how we need to position the infrastructure, services, and institutions in the context of transport, especially looking from planning, organization, and then managing it. And how it is important to look at also from the different perspective, like a planning perspective, organizational perspective, regulation perspective. And then she also tried to see that from the different dimensions, like a social dimension, how transport is linked to the social dimension, economic dimension, cultural dimension, and then administrative dimension, livelihood dimension. So how it is becoming a polydimensional perspective in understanding that is very important when we're looking at this as running like a vein across the cities and urban spaces, which is all, connected to multidimensional things. And then looking at this whole question of traffic density and looking at sustainable development. And very interestingly, I like the way in which, she's bringing the idea about this whole concept of, how the rich using the public transport becomes a progressive sustainable development parameter, how it is important. So we are actually upturning actually the transportation gaze, and transportation is understanding is being actually supported. It's interesting to see how that we can think about from that perspective. And intersectionality and integrational framework, very interestingly she brought in the intersectionality integrational framework into the transportation dimensions. So within such a short span, she brought in multidimensional perspectives to understand these things through an intersectional integrated horizontal, vertical dimensions and all. So I would really ask the participants to ask questions and to make use of the time. Thank you so much, Dr. Kundu.
Thank you very much, ma'am. The floor is now open for question and answers. Participants can raise their hands or unmute themselves. Yes, Lalit ji.
The question's going to come into the question box, Q&A.
Yes, but we will also give them the access to the mic.
Okay. He's saying he's unable to access the chat.
Yeah. Now we have given.
Okay, yes.
Hello, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for such a wonderful session. And ma'am, as we concluded about a study in the UK, I just wanted to understand, ma'am, that in the advanced developed nations, we tend to have a understanding that the governance frameworks enable them to perform better, or we could say the structures of governance enable them to have better accessibility. But also there is a context of population involved because of selective urbanization in case of India. So we have historically been having rapid urbanization around three major centers. That would be three major cities. And because of that, ma'am, if we were to compare the case of Mumbai, which has a population of over 23 million people, to a case of 9 million people in the case of London, it wouldn't be fair to say that only the governance structures enable them, because I believe that we do have institutions or government end support for things like sidewalks, because even in the last year, the Ministry of Environment in the case of Maharashtra, Mumbai, they had proposed sidewalks around the Powai Lake during the Powai Lake development. So I just wanted to understand that what kind of frameworks or what kind of steps do we as society can take for better urban transportation?
Thank you, Lalit. So I'd just like to say, I'm not trying to compare, advanced nations with, nations that are sort of developing still. And of course, the complexity of matters are far worse in our conditions than, in the context of London. But I think the London case study brings to you the importance of having a local elected member, a political member, right, who's a member of he's serving politician, the mayor, who is overseeing the entire dimension of transportation. And he's also overseeing land use planning in the city of London, right? So the thing is that and of course, by the mayor, he's just the representative person, but it means that, the decision making, etc., the coordination across different agencies are happening in a streamlined fashion. That there is no gap in terms of the agencies involved as to how information is transmitted, etc. But in the case of, say Maharashtra or say Mumbai particularly, if we were to be planning, for instance, the Mumbai Coastal Road comes up, right? Which is a project which the Mumbai Municipal Corporation has taken up, and it's a very expensive project. Now, there was a lot of public protest around this particular project, citing, that it is going to cost a lot of money, people's money, and it's also, not meant for the environment. But there was also a lot of transport planners say that, you're also bringing in the metro, right? But the city government is not bringing in the metro. The metro is being brought in by the state government, right? Now, why there is a difference is because the city government is not the same political power as the state government power. It's a different political power. So often we have these instances where the decisions that are made for the city are being made at the level of the state, and that's a different level of political party in power, and they know nothing, of course, about what the city requires or the city needs. Or sometimes even if it is the city government taking, a sort of a big ticket project like the coastal road, it is only doing it to prove its political power, right? But the rationale behind it is not a logical rationale behind it, because the logical rationale would have been that, you would not actually be competing with the metro system and the coastal road system. Who does it actually benefit? Does it really benefit the masses of Mumbai who need perhaps, better bus systems, better walkable systems? So really the fact remains that these kind of decisions are not being channelized through, say, a public decision-making process. It is being undertaken in a very high-handed, top-down manner, mostly at the state level. This is decided mostly at the state level, and therefore it is imposed on the ground level. As citizens, what can we do, right? We can sort of protest, of course. We can be better citizens by demanding better services, for instance, especially what affects us on a day-to-day life. Sadly enough, public transportation is never really on the top agenda of any political party, unless, it is a big ticket project. You will never see a politician coming up with, better sidewalks, or local government person saying, we need better pavements. Sometimes they will say, like you said, in Hiranandani Pawai, there might be a specific project. But what about, who is going to access this project, right? Is it going to be an island in itself, this walkable, sort of beautiful project of walkability? But who is going to really access it? Which groups are going to benefit from this? These are questions for which we don't have a public process of engagement. And that's because there is no sort of unified kind of structure where these kind of decisions can be made and weighed. The pros and cons can be weighed against one another. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. That was quite insightful. I also had a question around sustainability. That we said that it addresses urban poverty and sustainability to an extent, wherein the longer term solutions are solved by urban mobility. Ma'am, but the process of construction of any kind of mobility or transportation method, it involves the destruction of the nature to a good extent. So if we were to talk about the case of the metro shed for around the RA forest, or if we were to talk about the developments taking place in coastal regions, which take place post the destruction of the mangroves in those areas, which are a very sensitive to our ecosystem, very important for our ecosystem. So that is always a case of debate or in the context to sustainability versus development. But what would be a more holistic solution which addresses or caters to the masses and not only to the needs of the urban rich?
Mm-hmm. So again, who is making the decisions to build more flyovers and coastal roads? What percentage of your population is actually using that, right?
Ma'am, but
Who
local
are the... Yes?
The local governments are a forum of public representation. We do have a democracy in our
We
country.
do. But imagine some of these decisions are not even happening at the local government level. You know, your state government is taking those decisions, not your local government, right? So whereas, like I said, the coastal road is a local government project, but your metro is not a local government project,
Ma'am,
right?
even
The
government,
flyovers, the highways are not maintained, or in most cities, your flyovers, your road networks, sometimes it is the PWD, sometimes it is another sort of development agency that will be creating these networks, right? In charge. Even in the city of Mumbai, where a mass of the population moves by train network, the train is not under the control of the local government, right? The Mumbai Rail is not under the control of the local government. So, for instance, I'll just give you an example of how governance is. There are governance gaps in this, is because if I were to be harassed inside the local train as a woman, I wouldn't know where exactly to place my complaint, right? Would it be the railway police force? Would it be the police force of the city? Would it be, so whose jurisdiction would it fall into? And often we've found out women don't make these complaints because they don't know which jurisdiction it falls into. And they're sent, from one jurisdiction to the other to make these complaints. And this is part of a study that we did looking at safety of women in these systems. Often women don't know because there is no talking between the railway system and the bus system, which is operated by the state, and the local government that operates, the pavement and the sidewalks. The local government just thought, okay, let us not have hawkers around, say, 500 meters of railway stations, right? Which affects their livelihood. But it is done to enable people to move easily into stations. You don't want overcrowded stations. That leads to problems. But women have responded saying, this makes us feel more unsafe because sometimes, when the hawkers were there was some level of safety that was ensured because there were eyes on the street. So when you don't have governance agencies not talking to one another, it creates these kind of silos and gaps, right? And so I think what we need is therefore some kind of unified metropolitan, kind of transportation authority, which was conceived of by the National Urban Transportation Policy, which said, let's bring together this kind of a unified organization, which will have representatives from the development agencies, from the transportation agencies, from the local government. And these kind of decisions can be made in conjunction with one another. Because it is not the job of just one agency, neither is it, the jurisdiction of just one agency. It is multiple jurisdictions, multiple modes, multiple ways. And so governance has to be also in this complex format, including and integrating all these different agencies and coming together. But that's hard to do. As we are seeing, that's incredibly hard to do. No one wants to give up their power and authority over decision making, right? So I think that's where the trick lies. And a lot of the decision making that you see is elite driven. So even though, Bombay is a city of the masses and, we are really sort of looking at, how to move the masses, how to move the poor, the policy is talking about walkability, etc. But the money is disproportionately being used to build more roads, flyovers, and coastal roads, right? That's where the money is going. It is going to infrastructure that is going to benefit the rich class, the people with cars, which is probably only 7% of the households of Mumbai, 7 to 10% who own cars of Mumbai. So you can imagine the kind of disproportionate decision making that is happening in our cities. So clearly, we do have a democratically elected governance mechanism. But when it comes to transportation, a lot of these discussions are not happening within its ambit. It's happening within other corridors of power, other agencies which are taking control over the city and its transportation network.
Thank you for your answer, ma'am. I still missed the bit of around the sustainability aspect, but I would let the other participants have their questions for you. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you.
There is a question in the chat box. I'll just read it out. I'm not sure who it is. Do you think colonization and industrialization has perpetuated a Western-centric view of urban mobility that may not be suitable for countries which with sharp social divides and dense populations?
Thank you. And the short answer would be yes. We are unfortunately a colonized, a nation with a history of colonization, and our urban systems were developed in the colonial sort of context. And we haven't really moved out of that context. And so, yes, we still follow, what, the main kind of dominant paradigm thinking imagination is, which is really around automobile, sort of moving automobiles rather than actually moving people. So in the Western nations, particularly, and I would not say all Western nations, because Europe has a very different urban development trajectory than, say, Northern America or, say, even Canada, for instance, right? North America and Canada are much more automobile dependent. And they don't believe in compact cities. Their cities are sprawling. The urban areas are sprawling, and they believe in, one house for everyone and one or maybe more than one car for everyone, So, that kind of a model tends to really be, they believe in big cars. America really believes in big cars. And this was also seen as a way to, achieve economic development and growth in post-war America. European cities, on the other hand, tend to be much more compact and walkable in the older historic centers. And there they have actually tended to restore and also reinforce this walkability, etc., by keeping that image alive. What have we done? I think we are, unfortunately, our Central Road Research sort of institute, the norms around the Indian Road Congress, the norms for our road design, etc., follows the National Highways Act of America, for instance, which is heavily dependent on automobile movement, and traffic and transportation engineering is around the movement of cars rather than the movement of people. So yes, while our cities are totally different, we have very sharp social divides, and yes, very, very dense populations, and a mix also of different kinds of populations. And so if we sort of imagine the road to be specifically for the movement of private vehicles and not for public transportation, then, we will slowly move away from what we have, which is still, our modal split, or most of our urban trips, everyday trips, are actually made by walking or by public transport. So most of us use still 60% of the urban trips are by public transport, perhaps 40% is private transportation. Whereas in the Northern American states or in Canada, it would be 80% by private vehicle and 20% by public transport, if at all, 10% perhaps by public transport. So that's the kind of thing that if we move towards that development model, we are in for trouble, obviously, because already our cities, very old cities, colonial cities, where the road space is limited, so we can only build so many flyovers and underground passes, but, the congestion will be more and more and more. So we have to think of this very differently. We have to think about, how do we bolster our public transportation, because there is our investment for public transportation is going down. There are lesser number of buses, etc., on the roads, and that has led to, and the kind of failing nature of public transport is pushing people more and more to private transport. And that is a pretty bad sign, especially given the kind of congestion, air pollution that we're seeing in our cities. We need to really, really rethink how we can sort of bolster public transportation, how we can make our cities more sustainable by promoting walking, promoting, public transportation. Those would be the goals for our cities, rather than, expensive infrastructure that only benefits a few. Bhagyashri from Shiliguri, unregistered Toto e-rickshaw drivers protested against police restriction on highway access, citing livelihood impacts. They can't afford registration due to low earnings and loan burdens. Who determines their taxes and why aren't they income-based? Great question. You should do a study on this, perhaps. I'm not exactly sure, who determines the taxes. But I'm pretty sure that, the license and registration is at the level of the state department and the regional transportation authority, right? And they are the ones who are also in charge of, governing this. But unfortunately, sort of totos which are not registered, totos are kind of in between, they're kind of informal transport, not exactly recognized as public transportation, so they don't get the kind of sort of benefits or the kind of subsidies that other public transport perhaps incentives they would get, right? So in that sense, yes, there's always this tension around informal, unregistered vehicles, unlicensed informal vehicles. But I think the argument should be seen in a different way, is to see how important these vehicles are for the movement of regular people. Are they actually, addressing a gap in the public transportation? Many tier 2 cities I know do not have functioning public transportation, bus networks, etc. So there's no safe, affordable systems, which is why people have to depend on informal transportation like totos and auto rickshaws, etc. And in that case, I think those transportation networks really sort of support public transport. They're meant for the people and they're actually moving people around, regular people around. And that's the function that they play. So in a sense, if this is also a livelihood issue, then definitely, there should be a discussion around, whether, they could be, where they could be able to practice their livelihood. But of course, restricted access to highways is meant for safety measures often. Because of the speed of totos is not the speed as high-speed vehicles, lorries and buses, etc., which run on highways, right? So you don't want slower speed vehicles, different speed vehicles to run on highways, which is why they might be not getting the access to highways, which is a safety concern. Not so much, that the government wants to, take away their livelihoods. So when auto rickshaws and toto drivers are have the power of collective bargaining, which I'm sure there must be a union, etc. Some of these discussions around, how many licenses to be given out, what kind of registration is to be done, what kind of incentives or subsidies they might be getting, is something that, a collective bargaining process can enable for informal transportation in these kind of tier 2 cities. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Vipinji, you can go ahead.
Actually, I want to ask that government has just launched a program for tier 2 and tier 3 cities, population of 3 lakh to 10 lakh. That's called PM e-bus service. So in many cities that they don't have public transport, they are going to launch it. So I want to ask what precautions should be taken to design for such routes, and how should we go ahead with that concept or with that scheme, so that many middle class and poor class should be benefited from it. Please elaborate.
Thank you for your question. I have to say I'm not a transport planner, so I cannot talk about route planning for sure. But I think certain ideas come to my mind. One would be, of course, to understand where do people live, particularly where are areas where there is concentration perhaps of public housing, of slums, etc., because these would be the people who would really benefit from bus routes in the city, right? And that would have to be connected or passing through the center of the city, which is areas of work places, right? So in terms of these would be the routes that you would be looking at. Now, often it happens that bus routes are planned in a particular way in order to distribute, these kind of services, also peripheral areas of cities. And I know many examples where many cities in their peripheral areas, because these are scattered populations, less dense areas, you don't have enough bus service, right? Because for buses, you need a certain density of population in order to run, right? So can we think a little bit innovatively of how to maybe sort of link the main bus routes to, say, smaller vehicles that run in the peripheral regions, and they could then be linked to the main routes, which would be your e-buses. Okay. Now, e-buses, of course, the larger question for e-bus introduction is, of course, the charging facility, the charging infrastructure, etc. And the e-buses themselves are very, very expensive even now because of the technology that is involved. So I think, and once you sort of get these buses, you're sort of on loan, and, though they are less expensive when it comes to maintenance of these buses, but I find that, there are other questions and concerns when it comes to actually charging of these buses and the charging infrastructure, the batteries that need to be put in place for this kind of infrastructure, e-bus infrastructure. So there are possibly, if you look at the sort of, there are guidebooks by this agency called WRI, World Resources Institute. They make a lot of these white papers and a lot of easy to read sort of essential sort of books on how to sort of, cope with this kind of a new innovation in your city. You will be able to find some of these answers in their sort of website. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you,
Sorry,
madam.
but
My
I'm not a
second.
transport planner, so I'm not going to go into details of, that kind.
Thank you, madam, for guidance.
Yeah.
Next, my question is that I found that our environment, especially Indian environment, is not suitable for public transport, like, because we have so heavy rain many times, or sometimes we have scorching heat in our cities or in the. So people prefer to carry their own vehicle, like cars or their scooter. So I think how can we should tackle with this situation? Can we have other solution for public transport in this concern?
So yes, we are not blessed with the best of weather when it comes to Indian cities, but also, if you look at Copenhagen or Amsterdam, and these are cities which were able to convert themselves from being heavily dependent on cars to becoming cycling friendly cities, and even in the deep winter, you will find people actually cycling. And that's because not only is it more affordable, it's a healthier option, it's, it gets priority, and you're able to do many other things. And also the infrastructure, the road network, etc., is such that, it is actually prioritizing cycling and walking over other modes of transport. Having said this, I think some examples from, say, perhaps Hong Kong or Singapore in this case would be not so much Singapore because it's a tiny island, but maybe Hong Kong, where, dense city, very different topography and geography, very, there is a lot of urban poor also in the city, and also urban rich. And also they face typhoons and, extreme weather events, also very hot and wet. In that condition, how do they kind of manage to move people into public transport? Now, Hong Kong has a very unique history where, its land development was integrated with its public transportation. And so when it was making its underground railway network, it actually it actually sort of looked at which are the regions where people will settle or which are the regions where, housing needs to come up, public housing needs to come up. And so in a way, it's sort of the real estate development and the planning for the underground metro was kind of done hand in hand. So this is perhaps, easier when a city is growing or developing, but for older cities, say for instance, Delhi, Mumbai, or Calcutta, this is harder to do because it's already quite built up. In that case, we need to think about how to integrate public transport seamlessly, right? So if I'm going to be accessing the metro, which offers me a cool, comfortable, safe ride, it may be a bit more expensive. I need to be having the last mile connectivity. Means from my house to the metro station, I need to have a seamless pavement, a safe pavement, maybe a shaded pavement, or a place where I can rest if there's too much rain, which will allow me access to the metro station, right? But if in the process of how metro stations have been made in Mumbai, for instance, if you come, you'll find a lot of the Mumbai metro stations have been designed in a way where it has eaten into the existing pavement structure. And it has made the pavements dark. It has totally, disjointed pavements. There are no sort of, seamless pavements that are there. So people, as a woman, I would be actually very afraid to walk to the metro station. That would be the point that, will stop me from accessing something that might be cool, comfortable, and will take me a longer distance in a safe way, right? Which is also a sustainable mode of transportation, right? I will not be able to take that. So it is that last mile connectivity that becomes so crucial in actually ensuring what my decision making will be with regard to what kind of mode I will take up next. So yes, there is a lot to be done. And I think it is this last mile connectivity that is, very poorly thought of in our country, which leads to the lack of interest in, say, whether it's a bus rapid transit system or a metro system.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes.
Are there any further questions? If not, we can wrap up the session today. Manjula, ma'am, do you have anything to add?
Nothing. Thank you so much. I would like to thank Dr. Kundu for that very insightful class.
Thank you so much. I greatly enjoyed being here, and I really appreciate the range of questions. And hopefully, you can just, pursue some of your research around these areas in whatever path you choose. And, you will find out a lot more, I'm sure. Thank you for these questions. They also got me thinking.
Thank you very much, ma'am. We hope to see you in further future IMPRI events as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so now moving on, I am delighted to invite Professor Manjula Bharathy, professor at the Center for Urban Policy and Governance, School of Habitat Studies at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, and a visiting professor at IMPRI. A warm welcome, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you. So today we will be taking the session on gender, local governance. Let me share the slide.
I'm going to leave. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ratoola. Thank you so much. I hope it is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
So without, much introduction, Lilith, can you please lower your hands? Is it Lilith or Vipin? Sorry, it is Vipin, I think. Yeah. So today we will be looking at this whole question of engendering governance. When we are saying about the word feminization, then it always have a connotation that's something negative, and engendering something that we are looking from a positive perspective. And why we are saying from a right-based discourse of development? Because now today's development is now from a growth-based development discourses, from a welfareistic mode of discourses. Right now, we are speaking from a right-based discourse of development. Where we are speaking about right to life, right to live with dignity, right to food, right to employment, right to education, so right of basic services. So here it is important. So it is important to see that how gender, which has been considered as a marker of absence, how the questions, gender concerns are included into the city framework, and how it is important to see that from a right-based discourse of development. So the three things, when you're looking from the gendering governance, three things are important. One, ground of justice. Why it is the ground of justice important? Because all the time we are saying about social justice, we are saying about gender justice, we are saying about epistemological justice. So for me, as a person, and especially as the participants who are engaging into such a kind of classes, it is important that who is producing the body of knowledge around you. It is important to see that. Okay, when we are looking at a urban policy governance, urban policy framework, who is producing the knowledge around you? So most of the time, why the feminist scholars are very concerned about having a gender studies or a women studies, it is basically, we think that the knowledge is coming from a white, able-bodied men. So there is a dominance, the knowledge is being produced by a dominant group, and that knowledge is being considered as the norm of the society, order of the society, and the normative epistemology of the society. And then you are using that knowledge to throw the further policy framework. So it is important here to see that how come, why you are producing the knowledge. The politics of production of the knowledge, epistemology. We call it as a politics of epistemology. So politics of epistemology speaks about for whom you are producing the knowledge, why you are producing the knowledge, whose voices are unheard in the production of the knowledge. So it is important that when you're saying about governance, it is important that these voices, which, women's voices, gendered voices, women's voices, which constitute 50% to half of the population, they are not into the voice making, claim making spaces. So it is important to give them as a part of justice. Second, women's and men's interests are different. And then the experiences are different. Both of them are living in, like though we say that, okay, they're living in the same houses, the interest, the experiences of both men and women are different. How we will see in the next sessions. So now, when you're looking at the local governance and the women empowerment, it is important to understand the positioning of the welfare in the neoliberal context. All the terms are very, very problematic. So it is a very interesting article by Escobar who says about, how it is important to look the whole question of welfare, because when we are saying about the state was considered as a welfare state, where the concerns of the lower sections of the society were so important because it was a state mandate to provide the basic facilities to the people belonging to the lower economic strata, social strata. That is a welfareistic state. But then when the state became a neoliberal state, the ideology of neoliberal governance says that the state that governs the least is the best state. So withdrawal of the state from the welfareistic activities, from the health services, from the basic service sectors like water and sanitation, from education. So now, then in that context, it is actually changing the discourses around state and governance, like Dr. Kundu was now saying about when you're looking at, transport, then you have to look at the sectors, different sectors. Who are the actors? In which level it is coming? So when you're looking at the actors, who are the actors there? Is the market is an important actor? Because neoliberal governance is that, okay, now the market should allocate the resources. So then that changes the discourses around state and governance. So that is so the moment then you started saying that there's a neoliberal governance, what happened is that is always a privileging position of a consumer or a citizen. So here we said that gendered citizenship is important. Why gendered citizenship? There is a difference between a citizen and an individual. In the case of an individual, the individual is produced through the social relations. I've been known as a mother of so-and-so, a daughter of so-and-so, sister of so-and-so, wife of so-and-so. My identity is produced through the social relationships. But in the case of citizen, I am being defined by the way in which I am engaging with the public life. So all the feminist studies, when we're saying about, there is a divide between the public and the private. Why? Because the way in which the patriarchal system is putting women into the private spaces, into the personal spaces, and into the social relationships that makes the identity. It is important for the women to be a part of the public spaces to claim the citizenship. So the gendering governance is questioning the very philosophical understanding of the politics of absence of women in the governance process and deconstructing that, where you can see a multitude of phenomenology of absences, I may say. It's not one, multitudes of absences. And then trying to bring the presence into it. So you have to have a criticism of a development discourse. That is what we're saying, this whole question that empowerment for the women, it is very important. We'll discuss it now. And the whole question of governmentality. Again, this is a Foucauldian idea which speaks about, this is a form of power structure. Foucault speaks about 3 forms of our power structure. Sovereign power is a very important, disciplinary power, and governmentality. Governmentality is a form of power where it is important that there is a power to govern and power to be governed. Mentality that decides a power to govern. So every time, as far as the women, very interesting, Berger was saying about, a woman, right from the beginning, she has been taught to have 2 selves. One, the self of a surveyor, and one, the self of a being surveyed. So every time you are looking at something and you are also looked at. So this binary divisions of the women, that is we call panoptic gaze, continuously 24/7, this social panoptic gaze is looking at you. That to make, like always, that panoptic gaze makes us belittled, dehumanized, subordinated. So it is important that what is the mentality with which you are governed? And mentality to be governed. So to govern and to be governed. That is why we call it as a biopolitics. Govern means it is something to do with politics. Mentality means it is something to do with biology. So we call it as a biopolitics, which is an important understanding when you're trying to understand the gender questions of governance. So we need to address the issue of strategic gender need and a practical gender need. What is in governance? These terms are very important. What is a practical gender need? PGN. What is a strategic gender need? For example, like that you are saying that, okay, women have to carry water. In the water scarce places, women have to carry water. So in the planning process, what you will do, you will have the community tap so that you can reduce the drudgery of the distances the women are walking. So that is, you are actually addressing the practical gender question. Practical. So it is coming from a practical issue. But the strategic question is a patriarchal question where you're asking the root cause of why women have to go. It is a demand of the household why women have to go to fetch water. When you have the employment, working participation rate of women is decreasing, or the presence of the women in the public sphere is decreasing, we say that it is because of the care economy, women have the domestic force. But you have a sexual division of labor and a gender division of labor. So giving birth to young ones is a productive role, my productive role. Why the productive role is socially reproduced in such a way that I need to look after the kid. So you don't need to increase the working participation of men, you don't need crushes. But to increase the working participation of women, you need crushes. So that is a social reproduction of the gendered role, which speaks about the strategic gender need. Why? You having a crush is addressing a practical gender need. Why asking the question why, when to increase the women's working participation rate, you have to have crushes, is a strategic gender need. So a plan, when you're looking at a gender governance, when you're looking at a plan document, most of the time we see that we are only looking at the practical gender need. So the questions remain as it is. You are only addressing the periphery of it. So these are certain concepts that you have to understand when you're looking at the engendering governance, even when you're looking at your research papers. Most of these things, that you're asking me, this concept will be able to give you understanding it. One is reverse development, Naila Kabir was saying about. Naila was saying about, the entire development discourses was happening from the center. You have a center and you have a periphery. And now, like I said, the knowledge is coming from the white-abled men. There's a race there. There is a body that is healthy. And then the men, patriarchy. So the race, otherwise in a caste, and the gender and the class and the body is all coming, which is the privilege notions. So the people who are holding the positions with their class positions, caste positions, gender positions, ethnic positions, they are the one who started defining development. So we need to look the development from the fringes, from the margins. So the reverse development needs to happen, where the development needs to be looking from the subaltern spaces. So that is why we say, now we're saying about history. What history is to me is his story. And he is not a man, but a person with a power. So stories of people with power becomes history. So when we say that who built Taj Mahal, we said that Shah Jahan, we don't know the chief mason or the chief architect who built, or the thousands and 10,000s of workers who worked relentlessly for years to build that. Why? Because the history is always about the powerful. So we need to have her story. Means people who are belonging to the subaltern spaces, on the fringes, on the margins. So we need to have a reverse development, where the development needs to look not from the center, but from the margin. So then, from that perspective, we have to understand the empowerment. We continuously speak about women empowerment. So why the question of empowerment? And there is a difference between empowerment and a powerful. When we say that empowerment, it means that empowerment has a history of disempowerment. That means sometimes the people have power. On the course of development, they lost the power. Right now, what we are trying to do is to make the strategic interventions to empower them. So there is a history of disempowerment. Powerful means they have no idea what is powerlessness means. In the case of women, it is important, like we are looking at the hunter's age or a Paleolithic age, Stone Age. We know that they used to hunt together. Then the reproduction, like the very interesting question of, origin of angels, like saying about how the private property came, how the family came, and the decline of the women's status. Why? Because they were all started hunting together. They're having the same positions. What happened? Then they started settling down. When they started settling down, they started to have, instead of the common property, they have the private property. When you have the private property, people have the feeling that my property should go to my heir, my son, my daughter. So the private, it is my private. I should give it to my descendants or my children. So to have my children, I should have the sexuality control over my women. Otherwise, it was, like women have, it was actually the community together. You never know whose child it is. But now I say that I have and the property is a common property. Now you have a private property you want to give to your children. You want to control the sexuality, saying that I want. How can you? That by having the chastity principle. So look at that in the course of time, the familial values started changing. The patriarchy started coming in. The private property started coming in. And then the women's role had been defined to a productive role. What is it? the perpetuating the positions. So, and that is socially reproduced. So in the course of time, there is a disempowerment. And now what we need is to claim that position of power. The power of equality, power of voice, power of subjectivity, power of agency. It is important to get that, and power, So when I say power, it is actually, what does it mean? My right to choose. I have a plethora of choices around me. Excuse me. I have a plethora of choices around me, whether I have the power to choose, whether I can choose the dress I want to wear, whether I have the power to decide on the job that I want to go for, where I have the power to decide on the education I want to go for, whether I have the power to access the public spaces at time of my choice, whether I have the right of my body, whether I can choose my life partner, whether I have the life of my own life, right of my own life. Because now that is what Amartya Sen was asking, where are the missing girls? It speaks about the sex-detected abortions. That means even before the girl is born, then that is been aborted. So I don't have the life, So from the cradle, even before you are born into a space where you are born into spaces of denials, of discriminations, of belittlement, of humiliation. So it is important to claim that power from there. So it is important that public sphere. For women, public sphere is very important when you're looking at governance. There's a difference between a public space and a public sphere. Public sphere is a Habermasian concept. Habermas said that, okay, now when you have a public sphere, you have to discuss not for your narrow sectarian public personal interest. So when you're coming for a discussion, it should not be catering to the personal interest. It should be public interest. But we have discussed earlier that women are socially, their relationships, their identity is coming as an individual. So they're defined through the social relationships. So the interest will be so look at that, it's all connected. Their interests are very personal. So when women comes and says that, okay, now I need something for my daughter, I need something for my husband, I need something for my brother. And then the people started saying, oh, she always thinks about her family. Why? She's been confined to the familial spaces. And that is the world in which she lives, forms and informs her. And now to think beyond that to the public spaces. And that is what I said, to claim the citizenship. It's a different trajectory, moving from becoming an citizen from an individual is a trajectory. It's a journey. It's a violent journey. It is not easy because you are transcending the private spaces to the public spaces. That is why when women are saying kitchen stories, whatever women write, people say that it's kitchen stories. Then the women says, my personal is my political. Because why? Because you have made me confined to the private personal spaces. And now when I started speaking about it, that is the political. I'm claiming that as the political space. So sexuality, 50 years back, when someone asked about the sexuality, you'll say that, okay, why are you asking? It is my personal. It is very private and personal. But now it is a very political question. Why? The change in debate in the public sphere that changes the nature, structure, and, the mode of that debate to a public one. So it is important to engender the public sphere. And it is important to transcend the binaries, public, private, male, female. It is important, whatever we see, that it is important because everywhere, whenever the feminist scholars are speaking about it, they always say that public-private divide is the one that is the first thing that they need to transcend. And very interesting article by Partha Chatterjee saying that women's question is a question how to divide the public-private. And even, even within home, if you say the houses are the private spaces, and then the outside the houses are the public spaces, even within the houses, you can see that there are markers. The front room, the veranda, we call, or in Malayalam, we call Pumuham, that is a public space where the decisions are being taken, and women are actually being to the inner spaces, kitchen space. So even in the private spaces, there are public spaces. Very interesting article Kungum has written on that. So then the whole question about, politics, personal, public, what is political? So I am claiming my personal spaces to be political. And that is why we call, gender as a hegemony. Why gender is a hegemony? Hegemony is again, it is it's a Gramscian thought, and Antonio Gramsci, is a neo-Marxist. He brought about the idea of hegemony. Hegemony is nothing but, the ways in which ideology becoming a common sense through continuous socialization. It is not domination. Hegemony is the ways in which an ideology becoming a common sense. So in the case of women, what happened is that you can see how the ideology, what is ideology? Ideology means that cater to the vested interest of a small group of people. If you take patriarchy as an ideology, patriarchy as a system that has been designed by the men to cater to their vested interest. Through the socialization, continuous socialization process, that becomes the common sense. So when you say that I have a name, after my marriage, I don't even have the right to my name. I am called Mrs. and Mr. Krishna Kumar. No one questions that. It becomes the norm, When a wedding letter is given to me, it is written Mrs. and Mr. Krishna Kumar, accepted. No one will write as Mr. and Mrs. Manjula. So the moment we says about it, if I say that, okay, Mrs. and Mr., Manjula, then the people have a smile on their faces because it's not a common sense. Denying of a name to the women is a common sense. So ideology through the socialization process becomes the common sense. Usme kya, like what is wrong in that? That is the problematic space when patriarchy becomes a common sense. So then you have, like your mothers, you're saying that okay, women are, I've seen in so many of my classes, people are saying that women are the enemy of women. Why? Patriarchy as a common sense, internalizing the patriarchal norms and thinking that that is the way to be a good woman. So they internalizes the social values of the patriarchy, and that will be the social norm. So you have, like women jumping, women dying if they are being violated, women committing suicide because they consider they are nothing but their body. So it is important to see how you are through the socialization, a common sense is made, and you are manufacturing a consent. The societal consent is needed, you see that continuously is reinforced. All the soap operas, all the movies saying that if a woman is violated, if a woman is raped, then either she should commit suicide or she should ostracize the family things and go somewhere. Because then she should feel ashamed. It is not the people who violate her. Any other crime, we say that the people who are committing the crime are the one who are ostracized, who are ashamed. Here, when I've been violated, I am ashamed. I am not keeping my face open. That is you're saying, that is why you define the outraging the modesty. What is the modesty of the women? It is the chastity. So then the whole question of femininity needs to be re-understood. So then you have to think from that perspective where I think gender is a hegemony. So then when you're looking at the social institutions, looking at the way in which the economic role of women, you see that, okay, now there is already the social responsibility as a homemaker, as a housemaker, as a caregiver, that always limits women access to resources. And then that also reduces the the working participation. Now, like we have conducted a study with saying that why the working participation rate of the women is increasing, because you're changing from a joint family to a nuclear family. So even when the women are going, then there is no one to look after the kids, or no one to look after the elderly ones, if you have a elderly or aged parents. So then care economy, the social, that is what I said, gender division of labor is also decreasing it. So when you're looking at the social institutions, it is important to see that, okay, right to inherit, right to ownership and access to property. Right now we are saying that, okay, now we needs to have the property in the name of the women. Initially it was not that. But even if the property in the name of the women, who has the decision to sell the property or the rights to over the property? So it is important to look at all these economic factors and also the non-economic factors, like Ratoola was right now speaking about mobility, freedom of movement. Who has the freedom of movement? Like women cannot access the road, those women who access the roads after 8 o'clock. Now, Delhi rape happened. There are political leaders who are coming and saying that why the women have to go roam around the city at 11 o'clock. It is not, like the problem is with the women to access the public space. When a rape happened, then you say that she was wearing provocative dresses. Then you are not asking about, even if you're wearing provocative dresses, what is the right of the society to violate me? So it is important, to looking at this marriages before that and genital mutilation. All these things are important when you're looking at the non-economic institutions. So when you're looking at the engendering process in India, you say that 50s and 60s, like I said, state was considered as a welfareistic space, and women are considered as adjunct to the family. That is why we have the department called Family and Child Welfare. Because it is believed that if you are giving the dolls or the benefits of the development things to the family, it will trickle down to the women. Because where are women? Women are within the family. So you try to give insurances to the family. You try to protect the family. You try to give security to the family, then the women will get automatically. That is why all the department, women and child welfare, or family and child welfare, or family and women welfare. So it is family, women are concerned as adjuncts. So trickle down theory. But 70s, this idea started changing. The status and the positionality of the women was not changing, irrespective of giving it to family. So he started thinking that women need to be separate as a part of a development process, where we are calling it as a women integrated development, WID. You have to integrate women as a group into the process. Then came, the moment you have a women integrated development, what happened is that most of the plans, without understanding, like when we're looking at the Kerala model, that we say that 10% of the plan fund needs to be given to the women project. It was, women cowsheds, women roads, everything they prefix that project with women and became a women project. So it became a mere functionality, not serving the purpose. So then there came the question of gender, where you are trying to address the question of power. What is the difference between a woman and a gender? The gender, you are trying to address the question. You are bringing the patriarchy into the picture. You are bringing the issues of power into the picture. You are bringing the status and positionality of women into the picture, which is important. So that is the gender and development, and then the gender empowerment matrix. So those who are using that, this one, you can say that you can try to understand my study, which I try to do it in 7 states in India with the local governance and the gender and local governance in 7 states in India. I use this spheres like, metrics, that is the physical, socio-cultural, religious, political, and at individual level, household level, community level, state level, and at global level. How the governance process at the individual level. At the individual level, how I'm able to see me, whether my invisibility is changing, so that is important to understand that. How you're seeing women, the political, the moment you're saying about governance, it is important for them to come into the decision-making bodies, like in parliament, in the legislatures, the decision-making bodies, and then access and affordability of women to own the resources. So that is again important. So, but there are a lot of studies coming say that even if you are being representing affirmative action, the women have given representation. Does that bring empowerment? So we have issues like Sarpanchpati, that women are being given the political positions, but the real steering is being taken by the husband. But for me, I've, like in all my studies, I've taken a different stand, saying that, okay, now this is when you are, like you have made her dependent. The system made her dependent. System made her illiterate. System made her confined to the homes. And immediately the system is giving her the position of a panchayat president or a mayor position. Now she's not equipped, enabled to take this position. So the only one who can believe is the family around her. So she will ask her family support, because that is where she has been reduced to the kinship. Her kinship is been reduced to the family level. So she asked the family. Now we blame her, taking the help from the family. That is what we call blaming the victim. She's been a victim of a patriarchal structure, social structure, economic structure that made her a dependent. And then after a point of time, we say that, okay, she's dependent. Like, same thing we are doing to the tribal governance. We have discussed what is gender role, that is a productive and a reproductive role, and then the gender needs are practical gender needs and strategic gender needs. So it is always, stereotypes, like women's place is at home. That is what I said, the whole public-private divide. It is important. And women, it is the basics. Women need to be dependent on men, Women should not take, independent decisions. For example, in Malayalam, there is a word called Tanjedi. It's considered as a very arrogant woman. But what does the term imply? The term implies means a tanje idam. That means the person trying to carving one's own space. So a human who is trying to carve one's own space is considered as an arrogant space. Virginia Woolf is saying, like what I need is a room to write, my own space. But in most of the cultural spaces, a woman who is trying to carve their own spaces is considered as arrogant, because she needs to be dependent. That is a societal norm. She cannot take independent decision. She needs to be considered as a less authoritative, active. You look at that. That is, like continuously being socially reproduced. You go look for a movie, then the doctor will be a man and the nurse will be a woman. And then the officer will be a man and the assistant will be a woman. And then the judge will be a man and then the typist will be a woman. So you look at that position of hierarchy, position of power is always being held by women. And that is a continuously being socially reproduced. In a family, what we teach the children, father is the breadwinner and mother cooks food for us. And cooking is never been considered as a productive work. So if you consider cooking is nothing wrong. It's a very, like as a person, I love cooking. So cooking, but that has been belittled. So I want to say here one, share with you one incident. I was doing a study. One of my study was being funded by a Scandinavian group, So as a part of that, a Norwegian scholar was with me when I was doing my research. So we were doing the local governance, women and the local governance in 7 states in India. So we know that the time when the women are free will be during the afternoon. We used to go there. And then every time the women will, because I have done the studies in Bihar, Rajasthan, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Kerala, and, Mizoram and Manipur. These are So these are the places where I've done this study. So then when you go there, then the people, like in Bihar and Maharashtra, people will come and say either in Marathi or Hindi, koi nahi hai. So we know that the time when women are free will be in the afternoon hours, where their domestic course will be completed. The children will be coming at 4 o'clock. So the best time to go and discuss with them is the afternoon hours. So we knock the door, women come and open the door and they'll say, no one is here. So then we will discuss, okay, now we are here to discuss with you. And then they start feeling comfortable. So then one day the Scandinavian researcher asked me, why Manjula, every time women comes open at the door and say no one is here? So it struck me like a thunderbolt, because I was thinking that I am a person who's engaging with Gramsci, because he's one of the researchers where I take the class on Gramsci very specifically. And here I'm speaking on Gramsci, but how I myself is a victim of a hegemony where I consider the women to be known there as a normative thing, a normal thing. So no man will come and open the door and say that no one is here. So women comes, and the moment home is her safe zone, the moment she comes, open the door and sees a stranger, then she says no one is here. She becomes invisible to herself and to others. So the internalization of this invisibility. Women internalizes the invisibility. Why? From the time that she's born, saying that, okay, you are not belonging to this space, you are belonging to someone else's. You have been given the name in Maharashtra. It is like, first I said that, okay, now after my marriage, my name is changed to Mrs. and Mr. Krishnankutty. But in those from Maharashtra, you know that, okay, your first name is changed after the marriage. Suppose I am Manjula, after my marriage, I will be Sumati, Kumudi, or whatever it is, like my bridegroom says. Hello? Hello? Yeah.
Ma'am, it was
So,
by mistake.
hello?
It was by mistake, ma'am. Somebody unmuted by mistake.
Yeah. So my first name is changed. So when you say that your name is your identity, you don't have even the right of your name. And in Maharashtra, when I was doing the study again on local governance, it is said that, okay, if you have 3 children and 3 happen to be girls, and name of the 4th girl is Nakoshi, means not wanted. So we have interviewed 14 Nakoshis in Maharashtra. That means the family gives you the name as not wanted, thinking that if you give the name of the girl child as Nakoshi, the next child will be a male child. So you think that the family that thinks that your most dear one telling you that you are not wanted. Name is your identity, and that names tell you that you are not wanted. By whom? By your family. So when you're saying this is the spaces that women internalizes right from the beginning, that you are doing work from, she's getting up 6 o'clock in the morning and goes to sleep at 10 o'clock in the night. And what is it? But then husband comes and asks, friends, what she's doing. Oh, she's just a housewife. She's not doing anything. Her work is belittled. She's not been seen. She's invisible. She's inaudible. She's invisible. Her work is not being given recognition. Her care economy is completely. We have again done a study taking into the invisible work of women. So every time when the women, we are giving that as a servant maids, something about most of the women housewives are doing something, work about 15 to 20,000 per month minimum. But how many families, is valuing it? So it is important to get the politics of recognition. So women are considered as less. So important is that structure. Governance, it is believes that the governance process are gender neutral. It is not gender neutral. And then households are homogeneous. That means, like we thought, okay, now we give to household. It is not a homogeneous unit. It is a hierarchical power structures. So we need to consider that. And reality, structures and process of governance, men are real political actors. Women are marginalized in the process of governance. Inequalities within the family. Because again, we have done a study which says that women, what is the space that women consider very safe? It is their home. But if you're looking at the gender-based violence for the past 17 years, the domestic violence is the most reported crime. That means home, which women consider as a site of their safety, is the place they are being exploited and violated. So this is, the house itself is a point of power. It is important to see that. So from there, we need to understand gender mainstreaming, where we have to change the governance, institutions, bureaucracy, and then the gender sensitized core groups. Shweta, what is the time?
8:10. I think we can still go ahead.
8:10.
Yeah.
So I will, try to stop it, and we can take this, in some other time. I'll try to stop it by, saying the last one, because I brought in a thing of, Kudumbasri in Kerala. that is the largest community-based organizations in India with 48 lakh women members. So how the collective spaces and the gendering processes is making a politics of difference. So through my study, the book that I've written, it says that, okay, how the Kudumbashree movement is making from a politics of absence to politics of ideas, to politics of presence, to politics of agency and politics of subjectivity, where women started claiming their spaces. So it is important to see this, So how it is important here, it is, that how like it is important is that what women know and how the women live. Actually, they are actually in a divergent spaces. So important to see that, okay, the knowledge of the women needs to be coming into the center stage. So what happened, like very interesting, very few resistances, I'll say, in Maharashtra, in the local governance, we have something called a Kap Todo Andolan. That means the women from the lower caste are given a separate cups. So they have been asked to break the cups. And second one, I've seen in a lot of spaces, women who are being educated, who are being elected as mayors of the corporations or the board members of the corporations. And then, like they are not occupying the chair of the positions of chair. Now, that is basically saying, kursi basa andolan, occupying the chair of office. The first they need to take that, it is important. So that is called kursi basa andolan. So now we are looking for a subaltern history. So what it is, the important thing for the engendering governance, making women from the individuals to citizens. Like I said, they are claiming. So in my book, some of the women are saying, today I am sure if I die, I will get 10 wreath. Wreath means the floral decorations that happens to your body after your death. So 10 wreath on my body other than my family. So that means the confidence the women are having because they are claiming the public spaces. So there's a posthumous recognition. Also the women are thinking. They're saying we are getting a space within the home. We are always, like there's a interesting author called Kafka. I don't know how many of you heard about it. Kafka. So Kafka is one of the very interesting postmodern writer. So he said, like his father never recognized him. The father never wants him to be a writer. Father wants to be a doctor. But then he became an internationally renowned writer. But father never recognized him. So Kafka said that, okay, father, whatever I'm writing, it is for your recognition. That is a recognition from the root. So women, they want to be recognized by the family. So when we ask the question about, when the women are coming out, and we ask the question, what do you think is your most important achievement? Most of the women said that we got a space within the home. That means they are becoming visible. There's a politics of recognition happening within the home. My husband started recognizing me. My children started recognizing me. Till yesterday, I was a no one. But now, my engagement with the public spaces. So we asked the husband, we asked the children. They said that, okay, yesterday we thought her only as our mother or my wife. But today I see they are going to the bank. They are addressing the big functions. So there is an identity beyond the social relationships. So they're becoming visible. So they started. So politics of recognition from the home is something that is important. That is enhanced recognition at the personal, familial, and the societal position. That is what I said, got a space at home. It is important. Again, that is a very interesting theory of Nancy Fraser, identity model and politics of recognition. I am being recognized. For women, it is important. Yeah. So this is something that the women are doing in Kudumbashree, where, like I'm not taking, they're entering into very interesting livelihood practices, changing their economic spaces, changing their political spaces. And also, look at that, they are also engaged, coming into, very importantly, into the farming. Most of the farming spaces in Kerala is actually been now doing by joint livelihood groups. That is JLG groups of women. Women are coming from the women as laborers to women as farmers. That changed the status and positions of women. See, and they are using the Narega for this purpose. So again, it is important. That is what we said. Politics of absence to politics of ideas to politics of presence to politics of being. Thank you. Questions, please.
Thank you very much, ma'am. It was a very insightful perspective that you gave us on urban policies and planning. Of course, you focused on how it can influence the lives of women and also shape gender equality in our cities. Thank you very much. The floor is now open for questions. Um, we'll first start with Minu. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Shweta. Thank you for the talk, ma'am. So,
Little louder, Minu. I'm not able to hear you properly.
thank you for the talk. I just wanted to ask about the unintended consequences of um, the unintended consequences of like labor in Kudumbashree based on an article by J. Devika and Professor J. Devika and Professor Binita Vitambi. So my question was regarding like how do we, so women have been increasingly encouraged, especially in Kerala, to claim the spaces which are outside their homes and places which have not been conventionally occupied by them. However, there is also another side to it, because I feel that men are still they are still not taking part in what is the household labor, so that is not being shared. And how do, like, so while we are giving more work to these women, uh, how can we prevent burdening them, and how can we improve their lives in that way? Because essentially what we are doing is we are so what we can see is there is a lot of male unemployment in Kerala, and that creates some resentment towards working women. And how do we deal with this?
For the question. See, there is two aspects of it, Minu. One is that when women are coming, women are looking at a productive role and a social reproductive role. Production, reproduction, and a social reproduction. So one, when the women are doing a productive role to the economy, they're coming as laborers in the outside economy. At the same time, without getting any changes in the domestic core or the care economy which they are doing, which is actually being socially reproduced. Because it is, that is what I said, gender division of labor. Women are the one who is supposed to do it. So even if they are going out, like that is not that is not changing their domestic course. So the reproductive role is socially reproduced. Gender division of labor is socially reproduced. And then you are going out. So tripling the burdening of women. My question is that, okay, we have, gone to the for example, in Kerala, we have the Kudumbashree as the units. Within, like 2 years, when I was studying the Ullur self-help groups, that time it was a self-help group, then it was changed to neighborhood groups. Within 2 years, in that entire area, from 10 SHGs, it has been increased to 200 SHGs. And then the number of women who wants to be the ADS president, that is the Area Development Society, Community Development Society, that is the upper top, because the Kudumbashree itself is a three-tier structure with the NHGs, ADS, and the CDS. Women to be part of the CDS, there is a huge, because women are getting only 3,000 rupees or 4,000 rupees as a CDS honorarium. But still, there is a huge demand for the women to be the ADS member. So when I asked these women, why you're taking this? They said, ma'am, when we are going to the bank, then the bank manager is calling me madam. Initially, when I have to start a bank account, I have to go and, look at so many spaces. Now I am giving my signature as a CDS chairperson, and that signature is enough for someone to open a bank account. I can, sign and give that. Like I said, my family is recognizing me. And two of the people, I've written that article in EPW. One of the persons says that, okay, even my husband is asking me now permission before taking the love making. It has never happened before. So I feel, so elated. He's asking my consent now. So I asked the husband also. Husband said that now I treated seeing something as not as my wife, but as a woman who is actually leading and addressing a huge group. So there is, like women is getting visibility. So there is a politics of recognition that, Habermas again calling as a self-actualization. Till now, I was, like actually dealing, morning to evening, I was dealing with some work that is unrecognized, that was unheard, and that was not there. But now I am taking additional effort to be in a space which gives me recognition within the home and outside the home. And I value it. And women says that, okay, very importantly, women get that I am getting now wedding invitation cards in my name. It was never happened before. So this may, like seem trivia, but all the women we are asking, they're saying that this is very important to us. And the fourth factor, Meenu, they're saying about, the time that we are in Kudumbarsari is the time when we are coming together for us. We are talking about our problem. We are gossiping together. That is the women's group. So there's a comradeship that is coming up, which was never heard about. Initially, what happened is that when you're going, when you have a personal crisis, then your kids and kins could be only from the family. But now when women have a problem, then there is a collective group who they can rely on. So women have a comradeship, a kinship outside the family coming up, which they consider very important. So these factors also, I never belittle the argument, but Devika given, but my new book that I'm bringing out is also looking at this other aspect. We are looking at the subjectivity, not only from the economic perspective, there is also, we are working not only just for that. I'm not belittling. That is very important. But then there is an actualization coming from the other spaces that is also important. That is why this is, through the ethnographic examples that I'm getting from the field with a lot of people in across 7 states, I'm writing this. Okay, Minu, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So on the same note, I just wanted to ask, so I agree with the economic and social empowerment, but there is substantial social conditioning that leads to a rather tacit acceptance of the triple burden that you are talking about. And how do we deal with this?
Yeah. See, the whole question when you're saying about, like that is what we said about a power. When you're looking at the power is also conditioned power. So it is not easy because like we are saying about a patriarchy cannot be overbuilt in a day. The power structure, social conditioning around us is so strong that you see that, okay, Hindu, now, like matrimonial column is the best thing. I am always speaking about the social conditioning that you're saying about, who are the persons you want? You want a well-educated, thin, convent educated, domestic, a woman with a domestic value, traditional value. Why? That is, like the so-called educated group of people in Hindu, that's the matrimonial column. Because the conditioning is that, So the social patriarchy, you cannot overrule the social patriarchy. But I'm saying, that is my book says that, okay, there is a politics of agency. Through the course of time, even the places, Rajasthan, Bihar, Karnataka, here, what happened, here, the women, like one, in one of the panchayats here, that is, it's a caste-dominated panchayat, women is asking for a document, continuously she's asking a document, because the Up Sarpanch was actually using that, for illicit purposes. So she was asking that continuously in the Gram Sabha. So the Up Sarpanch, because the lady Sarpanch is coming from an upper caste, lower caste. So the Up Sarpanch said that, okay, now the people from our caste don't even urinate in your mouth. That is exactly the words that he said in the Gram Sabha. Then this Sarpanch seized the man in the collar and slapped him. That to happen in the Gram Sabha. So then the Up Sarpanch went to the police station to charge a complaint. Then he said that first, like that you have called, you can be jailed under ST harassment. You will be actually punishable. You have done a punishable offense. So you first ask. Then lady said that you render a public apology to me, and then I will render an apology to you. So then I'm saying that in the course of the time, the things are also slowly changing, 50, that is what I said, 50 years back, if someone asks about my sexuality, I'll say that it's a very personal thing. People are very ashamed. when I was making the documentary XXY on the first F2M transgender who made a public announcement in Kerala on Sri Nandu, which is actually got the best documentary in the Toronto Festival, that people say that why you are wasting your time to take the documentary. But right now that has been most sought after documentary. So the 10 years, 12 years of time, the perceptions, values, norms started changing. Only when you started social conditioning, then that is hegemony, the normalizing, then somewhere the pressure comes and then the counter hegemony comes, right? The women are not supposed to read 100 years back. It is considered as a sin. Women are not supposed to go outside for job. It is considered as not advisable. But now we are all started doing it. So social conditioning will start change. But when the social conditioning start changing, patriarchy will come with another thing. Now, like you say, that participatory democracy. In the name of participation has been appropriated. But then we'll have something else, It keeps on coming because no one wants to give the power easily.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Lalitji,
Yeah, Lalit.
Thank you, ma'am, for such an enlightening session on the gender engendering in governance. Ma'am, I had a couple of questions. Firstly, I wanted to understand, ma'am, as one of the fellow participants also mentioned regarding the care economy. Ma'am, a part of the social conditioning is mainly due to the work or the contribution of the women to the society that goes unnoticed or unrecognized officially, which includes work which they contribute to the households in numerous ways throughout the day. And even from my personal experiences, my sister is a working woman, and she is expected to contribute to the households, whereas the same is not expected from the male members. So this social conditioning is partly because of the contribution that goes unrecognized, because when male members earn, their work is duly recognized, but the care that the women provide goes unrecognized. So is there any way where we could highlight, or where the contribution of the women in the households can be officially recognized? Because there have been research which has showcased that if Indians were to measure economically the contribution of women, we would beat every country on the planet in terms of value that the women provide to the society. So in order to overcome the social conditioning, is there any way that we could highlight the contribution in a better fashion? And the second question was around ma'am, there was a recent reservation in for the women in parliament, which was a step towards the governmentality aspect, wherein the women could have a platform to represent their interests. So, ma'am, what are your opinions on the reservations that were announced by the government?
The first thing that you're saying, right, that is the feminist movements all over India for such a long time is asking for the due recognition of this unrecognized work burden of the women in the census, and that has been a huge demand. And we hope that that will be getting recognized, because that is very important. That has been a very strong civil society pressure, and then we need to work with the political society, like we said about, the other cure things. We need to work with them and then see about how can we make it as a law and an enactment. That is something that has been happening for such a long time with the feminist scholars and the feminist activists and the feminist workers. And it's been a strong demand. So that is there in the civil society. It's not a new thing. And the second thing you're saying about, the whole question of the reservation. The reservation, like that I'm saying, the 7 studies which we have done at the local governance is being funded by the Royal Norway Embassy, RNE, and also by the Hunger Project, is basically to show that women who are actually doing or elected at the local governance are making a commendable changes into the body politics of power, because they have been coming, and their presence, 50% reservation of women in the local governance institutions is making a change into the body politics of power. So we were, through the studies, trying to conduct the empirical studies to say that, okay, now women, the moment women are coming to the decision-making process, now then the process of governance is started changing, so that through the empirical study we are bringing in it, and its challenges also. So I'm a person who strongly believe at the same time also understanding the complexity of it. Like I said, the participation, representation is a prerequisite for a participation. Even if like that you are being there, that's not politics of representation, does not entail. It's not a requisite for a participation. That means if women are there, women are in parliament, does not imply that then tomorrow all the discourses that is happening there will be with a gender lens, So that could also be appropriated, So then, but the thing is that the change, that presence, politics of presence. Initially, what was it? Politics of ideas. Who is saying is not important? What is said is important. So in the governance discourses, what is said that, okay, now that there is a completely absence, women's issues were not discussed. Then you said that, okay, now men started discussing about the women's issue, saying that who is saying is not important, but it's what is said is important.
Okay.
And then came Anne Phillips saying that, okay, politics of presence, saying that no, the women coming there with their position of presence is important. Very important theory of Anne Phillips, politics of presence. Now
Okay.
we're saying that, okay, now for, I'm saying the fourth layer, saying that a politics of subjectivity. Women needs to use their agency to make a change with their representation. So representation means participation with an active agency that needs to come. So that we can see that is a process. I'm fully for that.
Thank you, ma'am. And ma'am, it is a very fresh idea. I just read in the newspapers today, ma'am. There is a feminist movement going on called 4B, which is basically a revival of a second generation feminist movement that is around 4 No's, ma'am. So these kind of radical movements, they are a
Now,
factor.
what is that movement? I didn't hear it properly. What is that movement?
It's called the 4B movement. It is a part of the layer of the revival movements of one of the previous movements, which has happened from South Korea, and which basically talks about no dating, no sex, no marriage, and no childbearing. So it is a very radical movement, radical feminist movement. But these kind of movements also have public liabilities, which create chaos in the society, because these kind of movements lead to extremism in the society.
No, the problem is that, okay, when the tribals, tribals were going to the left extremist wing, well, we said that, okay, why? Because, why there, like there is not a structural violence. There is a systemic violence. There is a difference between a systemic violence and a structural violence. Structural violence means the structures around you are violent to you. Systemic violence means the state is being violent to you.
Okay, ma'am.
So then, then they are pushed to the corner. All the extremist things when you're saying, all the insurgencies that they're saying, when there is a systemic violence, the state, which is supposed to be a protector itself, becoming a violent to you. Right. So then here is also, then you're saying that they're continuously, despite, asking the gender positions, like me was saying about, that, like they're going out, then they are being tripling it. The burden is being tripling it. So, like you have to take care of your elderly, you have to take care of your children, you have to take care of your family, then you have to also bring money to run the family. So there is a place where you get, you have no other, you don't have a place to move. You're pushed to the wall. Then you have no other option but to fight back. So maybe throughout the history of feminism, you have a radical movement. And throughout history of anything, you always have a radical movement. Like you're saying about communist movement, you have a communist Naxalite movement. It is not only in feminism. You also have any movement, you say, always a very radical movement, radical group. So similarly, feminism as a movement is also have a radical view. That's
Okay,
all. Ashish.
Yes, thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful presentation. I have a question regarding the hegemony that is there amongst the family members, and generally every family has got a different value system, and within that value system, how this hegemony really works. And yeah, so that's the question.
Yeah. See, the family has a value system from where? That is what you're saying about, like that's book of the origin of the family. When we were having a nomadic tribes, we were not having a family. So at certain historical point of time, we started conceiving the family as a social structure, basic unit of a society. And from where we are getting, and this family does not have a uniform family value. If you're going to Europe, the family value is completely different from that is coming from Asia, that is coming from Africa.
Yes.
So the family values, who is giving that? That is the question, Ashish. Exactly, that is what I said. Who are
Yes.
the people who are designing the family values? That is what I said, the patriarchy, where the people with the power started designing the family values, where women are getting in the course of time a belittling role. And that role is continuously socially reproduced as a common sense.
Okay. But madam, don't you think it should be a mutual kind of a system that one should follow in a family values?
That is it. What is this values that you're saying about? When you're saying about a value,
I'm talking about a mutual respect and a mutual space for.
That is not there, no, Ashish. So you cannot, you can say that in paper it is there, but in 80%, what I'm saying about the domestic violence, where is the family value? Now we are saying, like there are spaces when we are saying about cultural patriotism should be the key of a value. And what is cultural patriotism? Cultural patriotism means you should have our Indian culture. And where is the Indian culture? Indian culture is in family and the home. And which is the home? That is, who are the homemakers? Women are the homemakers. Why the family is getting disturbed? Because women are going out. Now they are not getting enough attention to the family systems. So that is why the family is getting distorted. Family, so many divorces we are having because women are going out. They are becoming economically independent. So what is now? They have to be within the home, looking after the family. So now the whole question is that now we have a course that is UGC approved saying that how to be good wives. It could be a course,
Okay.
Because you are reviving that value systems. Because you think that family is the most important thing and where the women should be the homemakers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, ma'am, I would request you to kindly give your closing remarks.
Closing remarks. So what I feel about, then when you're looking at the engendering the cities, spaces, it is important. City as urbanization spaces, like now with the urban sprawls, cities are becoming very exclusionary spaces, especially for women. When we're looking at the right to the cities, right to the spaces, whether we need to see that there is violence in the city and of the city. The planning of the city, the architecture of the city, the design of the city itself is not gender friendly. Plus, there is violence continuously happening within the city. So there is violence in the city and violence of the city. So when we are saying about the right to cities, we should have a place where we need to look at the gender sensitive, gender responsive, and right to equal spaces, where that should be our that is a sustainable city, that we are a gender inclusive spaces in administration and decision making, in allocation of the resources, in management, in planning, in design. Then we can say that, okay, that is very, very important when we're looking at and the media images that is coming out. We need to place that city as a gender sensitive and a gender responsive urban spaces. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Ma'am, can we move on with the vote of thanks?
Should I say vote of thanks?
No, I'm asking your permission.
Sorry to interrupt. It's really sorry to interrupt. Ma'am, should we discuss a little bit about the Sunday class so then I can put it officially also?
Sunday class, see, I got letters from some of the participants, at least 3-4 letters I got asking that they need to have some understanding about qualitative research methods, the methodology, and how you're doing it. So we will be having very brief things about, methodology, philosophical underpinnings of it, very brief, and then methodology, methods, and also, since most of the students are taking case study as a participative methods, how to conduct a case study. So I'll be taking a 2-hour lecture where, with basically on the methodology perspective of a qualitative research, and also one of the methods, that is a case study in very particular.
Thank you,
So
ma'am.
Priyanka, what's the time that you said? I don't
Ma'am,
remember.
4 p.m. I asked you if 4 p.m. is okay.
Fine with me. For 4 to 6 is fine with me.
Yes, ma'am. Then I'll put it out officially also that Sunday 4 p.m. for discussing the research methodology and how to take a case study, right? Yes.
Yeah. So research methodology, philosophical underpinnings, methodology, methods, and also the case study. That is what I'll be taking in brief. That will help them. Basically, I'm facilitating them to undertake their research paper.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we can move ahead with the vote of thanks with that. Shweta, over to you.
Right, so as we come to the end of day 8 of UPLGYF, Urban Policy and Local Governance with Fellowship, an online national autumn and winter school program, a 4-month online immersive introductory leadership certificate training fellowship program, I, Shweta, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, New Delhi. We are grateful for our chair and experts for the day 8 session, Professor Manjula Bharathy and Dr. Ratoola Kundu, for taking out their valuable time and allowing us to learn from this online certificate program. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and have actively participated in today's deliberation. We look forward to welcoming you on November 28th for day 9 of this certification course by distinguished expert Professor Manjula Bharathy, followed by a discussion. We are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day. Thank you.
I just want to reconfirm that 28th, I'm not taking the class, right? I'm not here.
Ma'am, November 28th, one discussion session was scheduled. Previously, like November 28th was, firstly your session was supposed to happen, and then it was supposed to be followed up by the discussion regarding the research papers of fellows.
No, you said that there is one session that is supposed to happen today, no? That will happen on
yes. It was Ravikant's session. So in place of your gender and cities session, we rescheduled it Ravikant's session to November
so then
20th.
that will be happening now.
Yes, that will be there, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah. So
Regarding 28th, ma'am, I'll reconfirm it with you, like closer to 28th. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Priya. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.